My 18-year-old daughter poured her heart into cooking for 25 guests over 3 days for my mom's birthday. Then my dad canceled it all with one cold text, "We're going to a restaurant, adults only." I stayed quiet, but what I did next made the whole house shake. 15 hours later. Ellie, my daughter, had always had a flair for the culinary. At just 18, she could plate a meal like a 5-star chef and make a soufflé rise without fear. Her creativity in the kitchen wasn't just skill, it was love, poured into every dish with the passion of someone twice her age. So when she heard we were planning a surprise party for my mom's 70th birthday, she took it personally. "I want it to be perfect," she said, tying her apron with the kind of conviction you usually see in generals, not teenage girls. "No store-bought nonsense, everything fresh, everything homemade." I smiled, touched by her dedication. It was more than a party for her. It was her way of honoring her grandmother. We spent 3 whole days turning the kitchen into a bustling, aromatic battlefield. Ellie worked like a woman on a mission. She made lasagnas from scratch, layering homemade pasta with a rich meat sauce that simmered for hours. She kneaded dough for artisan breads, her hands dusted with flour, her brow set in concentration. She slow-cooked stews, filled with hearty vegetables and seasoned to perfection, and even made tiny mousse-filled chocolate cups that took hours to perfect, each topped with a delicate swirl of whipped cream and a single raspberry. She barely slept. On the second night, I found her still in the kitchen at 1 a.m., whisking cream while listening to an audiobook about French cuisine. I told her to get some rest, but she only said, "Just one more thing. I want Grandma to remember this, forever." Meanwhile, I coordinated with my siblings and my mom's old friends. The backyard was cleaned, lights were strung, and we even borrowed extra tables and chairs from the church hall. Ellie chose the centerpiece designs herself, wildflowers in mason jars with little handwritten name tags. She even printed menus, complete with a title, "A Night to Remember, Celebrating 70 Years of Grace." By Friday evening, everything was ready for Saturday's celebration. The kitchen smelled like heaven, the lawn looked like something out of a magazine, and Ellie, though exhausted, was glowing with anticipation. That night, Ellie and I were setting out cutlery when my phone buzzed. I assumed it was one of my siblings confirming the arrival time. Instead, it was a message from my dad. "We've decided to celebrate at La Riviera instead. It's adults only. 6 p.m. Let everyone know." I read the message twice. Then a third time. The breath left my lungs like I had been sucker punched. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Ellie looked up from the tablecloth she was smoothing. "Something wrong?" I couldn't answer. Not immediately. My mouth opened, then closed. I stared at the message like it might change if I blinked enough. She followed me into the kitchen. I handed her the phone in silence. Her eyes scanned the screen and, slowly, her face collapsed. The sparkle that had lit up her entire being dimmed. In an instant. I watched her heart break right in front of me. She didn't cry. Ellie wasn't a crier, but she just nodded slowly, then turned back to the sink and started washing dishes she didn't need to wash. Her silence was louder than any scream. I could feel the weight of her disappointment crushing both of us. I wanted to march over to my parents' house and demand an explanation. I wanted to shout, to show them the effort, the sweat, the heart my daughter had poured into this celebration. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed quiet and started planning. Saturday morning dawned, gray and wet. Rain had soaked the lights we had strung in the backyard, and the tables, still covered in floral cloths, stood solemn and unused. The whole setup looked like a ghost town from a celebration that never came. Food containers were sealed and stacked. In the kitchen, untouched, their delicious aromas now tinged with sadness. My phone buzzed every hour with relatives confirming they were heading to the restaurant. Ellie hadn't come out of her room. I let her have her space. But by noon, The silence became too heavy. I walked up to her door and knocked gently. "Ellie?" "No. Answer." I hesitated, then cracked the door open. She was sitting on her bed in her pajamas, scrolling aimlessly on her phone. Her hair was messy, and the glow she'd had for the past 3 days was gone. When she looked up, she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was just thinking," she said quietly. "I bet the moose would have been everyone's favorite." That was the final straw. The defeat in her voice pierced me deeper than anger or tears ever could. I sat beside her, placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and said, "Sweetheart, get dressed. I'm going to need your help." Her eyebrows furrowed. "With what?" I smiled but didn't explain. "Just trust me." By 3 p.m., I had loaded the food into warmers and sealed containers. The smell of roasted garlic, herbs, and chocolate still lingered in the air, like ghosts of a party that never happened. I made a few quiet calls. Some friends, a local youth shelter, a women's refuge, a few families in our church group who were going through hard times, and I started driving. Ellie sat in the passenger seat, quiet but curious. At 4 p.m., we arrived at the community center on the edge of town. It was an old, humble building with creaky floors and flickering lights, but it had long tables, chairs, and an open heart. I'd booked it on a hunch that morning, not sure what would happen. The volunteer coordinator met us with a surprised but warm smile. "You really brought all this food?" I nodded. "More than enough for everyone." By 5 p.m., people started trickling in. Some I knew by name, the Thompsons, who had just lost their home in a fire. Others were strangers, a group of college students, who had no family nearby, an elderly man with shaking hands who said, "I haven't had a warm meal in days." And then came families. A mother with 3 children, a pregnant woman holding the hand of a boy no older than 6. They came hesitantly at first, but Ellie's energy changed everything. She wore her apron like armor, welcoming each guest with a smile. She floated from table to table, serving lasagna with careful precision, offering second helpings, asking about favorite dishes. I watched her serve lasagna to the single mother with 3 kids. The youngest, his cheeks stuffed, asked if he could have another moose. She beamed and said, "Take 2. They're magic." It was beautiful. Laughter began to rise. Conversation started. People who walked in as strangers began sharing their stories over plates of homemade bread and slow-cooked stew. And there, at the center of it all, was my daughter, feeding, hearts as well as stomachs. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed again. It was my sister. "Where are you? They're about to cut the cake. Dad's asking for you." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out my phone, took a candid photo of Ellie surrounded by people, her smile brighter than it had been all week. Then I put the phone away. I knew where I was supposed to be. Later that evening, after we cleaned up and handed out leftovers in takeout boxes, Ellie and I sat outside the center, side by side on the front steps. "I thought today would be the worst day of my life," she said. But it wasn't. Why's that? Because it still mattered. I still cooked for someone. It wasn't who I thought, but maybe it was who needed it more. I wrapped an arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "You did good, sweetheart. You did more than good." We drove home in silence, a comfortable kind, the kind that sits with you when you know you did the right thing. 15 hours later, at 8 a.m. Sunday morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee, still thinking about the night before. My muscles ached, but my heart felt full. Then the front door started shaking violently. Not just a knock, a full-on pounding. Someone was on the other side, knocking like they had something to prove. I opened the door. It was my dad, and he looked furious. He pushed past me without a word. My mom followed, more hesitant, holding her purse like a shield. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the worry etched into her brow. "You didn't show up," my dad barked, spinning around to face me in the living room. You embarrassed us. Your mother was heartbroken. I didn't flinch. Instead, I calmly walked to the counter and poured myself a second cup of coffee. The rich aroma filled the awkward silence between us. Did you even ask her if she wanted a restaurant party? I asked quietly, not accusingly, but firmly. That shut him up for a second. He turned toward my mom, eyebrows raised as if expecting her to jump in and defend him. She looked between the two of us, then slowly shook her head, eyes moist. I would have preferred being with family, at home. It was like someone had let the air out of my dad's ballooning indignation. His shoulders sagged just slightly. The room went still. Then footsteps echoed down the hallway. Ellie walked in, still in her sleep shirt and pajama pants, her hair a mess from bed, but her face calm and composed. My dad turned to her. "Why didn't you come? Why would you cook like that for nothing?" Ellie held her head high. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't for nothing. We fed 30 people who would have gone hungry last night. People who needed it more than you needed reservations. It turned out to be the best party I could have imagined. He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it again. Whatever words he had, they wouldn't come. Then a soft voice broke the tension. My mom. Did you really do that? Ellie nodded. We took everything to the community center. People showed up with their kids, their stories, their pain. We fed them, we laughed, we danced. It was beautiful. Tears streamed down my mother's face. She crossed the room and hugged her granddaughter so tightly, I thought they might fuse into one. Her hands clutched Ellie's back like she was anchoring herself to something solid and good. My dad just stood there, for once, speechless. I saw the cracks forming in his expression, the confusion, the guilt, the shame. Eventually he muttered, "We made a mistake." I nodded. Yes, you did. But I wasn't angry anymore. The moment had passed, and Ellie had already turned it into something better. What happened next surprised even me. My mom stepped back and took my dad's hand. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's sit. Let's talk." We sat around the kitchen table, the one Ellie had polished for the big event. It was bare now, except for a single leftover mousse cup Ellie had saved, sitting in the fridge, untouched. I slid it toward my dad. "Try it," I said. He hesitated, then picked up the spoon. One bite. He paused. "You made this?" Ellie nodded. "You're better than any restaurant chef," she grinned. I know. It could have ended there, with a moment of pride and a shared dessert. But it didn't. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Then again. And again. Family began arriving at our house. One by one. Some were confused, others apologetic. My sister hugged me like she hadn't seen me in years. "We heard what you did," she whispered. I wish I'd known." They brought wine, music, and trays of desserts they'd picked up on the way. Some even brought folding chairs and tablecloths. They wanted to celebrate, and so we did. We lit candles in the backyard just as the sun began to fall. The rain had stopped, the lawn still smelled of damp earth, but the string lights glowed like hope. Ellie brought out the remaining dishes, reheated and replated with care. My mom laughed. My dad sat with the younger cousins and told them stories from his youth. People sang, toasts were made, not the elegant kind with champagne flutes, but the kind where you hold up a paper cup of lemonade and say, "To doing the right thing." At some point, someone pulled out a Bluetooth speaker. Ellie danced barefoot on the grass with my niece. My mom joined them, then me, then shockingly even my dad. It wasn't the party we planned, it was better. In that messy, unplanned gathering, filled with leftovers and last-minute guests, we found something we hadn't expected: grace, forgiveness, family. And as Ellie passed around the final mousse cup, she paused by my dad. He looked at her and said, "If you ever open a restaurant, I'll be the first in line." She laughed. "Deal, but you're sitting in the kids' section." He chuckled, and for the first time in a long time, we were all truly together. The end.